This is actually a picture from our friends in Panama, Iván Eskildsen, who will be on stage in a moment, with my sister Stephanie Walcott, who will interview Yvonne about inclusive prosperity and some great work they're doing in Panama, which, by the way, is one of only 3 countries in the world that is carbon negative. But this scene is actually a mangrove forest that we had the privilege. I was with the abroad team. Justin Milano and I were down in Panama with Yvonne, and they took us in boats through this mangrove forest to an indigenous community. And it's, I have to say, one of the most unexpected and beautiful experiences I've ever had in my life. So with that, I will welcome Iván Eskildsen, Minister of Tourism for Panama, and Stephanie Walcott to the stage.
So the theme of our gathering is Transcend. And there's a small country to the south that's doing a lot of transcending these days. Transcending what many larger countries thought was impossible. Acting as a catalyst in Latin America and providing a blueprint for the rest of us. As my brother mentioned, Panama is one of the first certified carbon negative countries in the world. They're leading a coalition on giving legal rights to nature. They're building one of the largest scientific stations in the Pacific, and they're creating an open source template for regenerative tourism. Indeed, there's a lot to talk about. We're honored today to welcome the Minister of Tourism of Panama, Iván Eskildsen, who will share how his country is building its economy at the same time it's fostering cultural and biological diversity. Minister Eskildsen, bienvenido. So a sub-theme of our gathering is space exploration. Panama has a very interesting connection to NASA, actually. It turns out that some of the most famous astronauts started their journey to the moon in the Panamanian rainforest. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, first of all, good morning to all. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you, sharing about innovation and solutions for the future. Thank you to Rob. It was an awesome experience in Panama. So space and Panama, how does this connection happen? Very interesting story. It so happens that when NASA was training the astronauts to go to the moon in the Apollo space missions, they turned to an indigenous chief in the jungle of Panama to train the astronauts. Why? Apparently, they wanted to have a training in case the astronauts landed in the jungle. So they were trained in jungle survival in the jungle of Panama. But also, they were also trained in survival in extreme conditions by this indigenous chief who didn't have any formal education as well. So this will be a sub-theme we'll be touching upon on how science can connect with the indigenous wisdom of the different traditions around the world. So this is also something that was an inspiration for when I had the opportunity, or say, when I began this adventure as Minister of Tourism appointed by President Cortizo almost 3 years ago, when the situation we had at hand was that tourism in Panama had never really been developed outside of Panama City. If any of you have been to Panama City, it looks a little bit similar to Miami, by the way, as far as the skyline is concerned, except for that we have our skyscraper capital of Latin America is basically surrounded by the jungle. So we have 20,000 of the 30,000 hotel rooms are in Panama City. And on the other hand, we have these beautiful rural communities, 7 indigenous peoples, mestizo communities, Afro-Panamanian peoples that have been facing a very difficult challenge to create jobs and also to retain the youth in their community. So they have been migrating. So even though we have been, right now we are grateful that these communities have been able to preserve their beautiful, authentic cultures, we are facing this deep challenge on how can we support these communities and empower them. And that's where our talk today will be focusing on the sustainable tourism model of Panama, and how can we actually transcend from our current situation with the tourism focus on Panama City and actually being able to benefit these communities throughout the country.
And you mentioned that this template for sustainable tourism is open sourced. So what does that mean to you?
So for us, it means that we believe that this is a common reality in all of Latin America. We have deep social inequalities, a very wide gap in income in all of Latin America. So it's not a secret in any of our countries. So what we have in Panama, we believe we have the opportunity to really develop a case study on how this common reality can be shown to be successful, and how tourism can be a means to empower these local communities, attract what we're calling discerning travelers that come to these communities with a respectful attitude, honoring the culture, the local culture, and looking forward to being part of this regeneration. So not only with the fact that their income will allow the youth to have jobs and to also have the opportunity to stay in their local communities, but also the fact that when people come and honor the local culture, we have seen the effect that this does. This increases the pride of the youth. Now, when instead of feeling this dilemma that they're faced when they go to the city and they are attracted by the modern culture, which is nothing bad, of course. Actually, we need the best of both science and their ancestral traditions. But now they become closer to their elders. They become closer to their ancestral traditions and understand why this is so valuable for them, and really have an opportunity through this sustainable tourism model to create an opportunity create a new economy in the rural areas. And we hope that later on we can export this model as this open source template to other countries, not only in Latin America, but in other countries that face this reality around the world.
Oh, that's great. I've also found that when you're talking about pride and finding the connection between economic development and culture, things like an arts and crafts market and supporting artisans from those cultures, when they see that there's a market for what they make, they actually then begin to, oh, I'm going to have to talk a little bit louder. Can everybody hear me without my mic? Yes. Awesome. Then we see a resurgence in those cultural arts and crafts, and I think that can be very powerful as well. So now I have to talk a moment about the Panama Canal. When many people think about Panama, that's the first thing that comes to mind. And when I was initially doing research for this panel discussion, I found out that every time a ship goes through the Panama Canal, it takes something like 52 million gallons of fresh water for that one ship to go through the canal. And if there's 38, okay, is it on? Is this great? Okay. 38 ships a day. So that's 52 million gallons of fresh water times 38 ships. That's a lot of fresh water. Yvonne, where does it come from?
Well, it comes from the rainforests of Panama. So actually, the several connections here. The beautiful piece you're wearing is made by the Embera people that they inhabit the Panama Canal watershed, the rainforests of the Panama Canal watershed. And these also happen to be the people that where the chief that trained the astronauts are from. And we're working very closely with all 7 indigenous peoples of Panama. And these particular people, the current chief of those people in the Panama Canal watershed, the current chief is the grandson of the legendary chief Sarko. So very beautiful story that has resulted from this initiative in working together with these communities, approaching them, is that we worked a storytelling workshop with the community, and we were looking into which stories they could tell that could be attractive to visitors about their world vision, about their spiritual connection to water and the rainforest being so important, that them being the guardians of the rainforest is important for world commerce, because the water for the canal needs the rain, and the rain needs the rainforest. So there's 7 national parks around the Panama Canal. And the result from this storytelling workshop was that the sort of not the youngest people, but sort of the middle-aged ones were experiencing that, hey, these stories, I remember that I used to hear them more from my elders, but not as much anymore. So we started seeing this regeneration effect from the Embera people saying, increasing their pride again and wanting to reconnect to their local traditions. So a very beautiful experience, specifically with the Embera people.
Okay, so what I'd like to point out is that indigenous tech is climate tech, is clean tech, right?
Absolutely.
And there's also a statistic that I would love to bring up again, and that is that you mentioned indigenous people make up about 5% of the population, and yet they're caretakers of about 80% of the world's biodiversity. And what you heard Minister Eskelsen say is that there's literally 7 tribes of people that take care of the watershed that make the Panama Canal run. What does that mean? If they weren't doing that, the global supply chain would have problems. So we rely upon them very much. And that's also, I think back to how this panel was a good follow-up to Peter's panel, because what we are talking about right now is regeneration, right? And we're talking about safeguarding those ecosystem services. Panama was doing ecosystem services before most of us knew what that meant. So what do you think other countries can learn from Panama?
So one of the things it's closest to my heart from this experience, very, very crazy adventure of being involved in politics and getting qualified to see all over the place, such as the previous presentation.
You're going to get an A, right?
Usually people, the work in politicians, either that they are good or bad, they get a C or worse. It's not a very gratifying work. You do it because of purpose and passion. That's the only reason, right?
And you have that.
So one of the closest experiences that I've had is closest to my heart is this human approach to indigenous communities. They have been obviously historically very skeptical. They've been stepped on for hundreds of years, so you can't expect them to just open the doors and allow them to work with whoever comes at their door. So we have had a very continuous and patient approach to these communities. We first presented our indigenous Panama tourism circuit to the 12 chiefs of the 12 territories of the 7 indigenous peoples throughout the country, and they liked what they saw. Of course, they said, well, you have to speak individually to each one of us in order for us to work together, but it's a good start. And then we are able to sign for the first time ever in our country an agreement with the Gunas, who were actually one of the first autonomous territories, indigenous autonomous territories in the Americas. And we were able to sign with them this agreement to work with them closely, to work in tourism. And then we got this beautiful letter that I'll hold also close to my heart. And it's one of the highlights of the experience of working here as a Minister of Tourism, where we presented to them the idea of working on creating content, audiovisual content, based on the spiritual traditions. And their Cultural Congress, which is the safeguarder of their spiritual traditions. At first, they were very cold and distant. In the meeting we had, we were very nervous when we presented this to them. But at the end, they sent this beautiful letter saying they were very grateful for us wanting to work with them and to co-create this idea of creating content. And also, and especially the idea of respecting their culture and honoring their culture. And actually, now that Rob mentioned it, this is something that we're working, after this visit to Panama, we're working with the idea of, with abroad, working together with this content and also showing it to people that are respectful and honor the culture of the indigenous in Panama.
I'm going to buy my plane ticket. We are at time, so I have one more question for you. We have many purpose-driven people from all over the world in the audience. If they're interested in a little transformative travel or in helping Panama build an economy based on regeneration, where do they start?
Well, certainly two alternatives. You can visit Panama, and we have a website for the country and our destination, visitpanama.com. But for any of you who would like to get involved a bit further, we do need a lot of support. It is a very uphill battle trying to convince the traditional hoteliers in Panama City that have not understood where we believe the future is going to, this type of discerning travel and connecting with pristine environments and authentic cultures. So we are looking to attract investors, partners, NGOs that are looking to be a part of this model and to try to support this idea of regeneration, either for-profit, non-profit, and the idea of empowering these local communities, and again, with the idea of creating an impact and transcending.
Perfect. Well, Twinians, this is your invitation to travel to Panama, learn more about what they're doing down there, be part of the solution, and maybe have the trip of a lifetime.
Thank you.
Gracias por venir.
All right.